on the football side, with Chip Lindsey, Michigan's new offensive coordinator, he joined John Jansen on the In the Trenches podcast this week and kind of talked about his vision for the offense, what brought him to Michigan. Talked a little bit of Bryce Underwood, Mikey Keene, some of the quarterbacks, what his plan is going to be. Of course, he's also Michigan's quarterbacks coach this year. And, a lot of these conversations you get, kind of the same jargon. We want to be balanced, explosive, that sort of thing. Our vision aligned, him and Sharon Moore. But there was some insight into what Chip Lindsey's vision is with this offense. And a couple of the points that stood out to me were, okay, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We won the national championship here in 2023. He said he wanted to be at a place that has a chance to win the whole thing, to win every game. He said this is one of these places. And, I think he's going to mix kind of what he's done in the past with what Sharon Moore has done with this Michigan offense. He said, I love how we approach the game here. I love what our DNA is here. We're tough, physical. I think that'll continue to carry over. Later on, he said, our goal is to have the most physical and explosive offense in the country. That's what our mantra is. John Jansen, of course, an offensive lineman, wanted to know this. He said, hey, does the run set up the pass, or does the pass set up the run? Kind of the age-old question. And I think John was probably happy to hear Chip Lindsey say, hey, the run sets up the pass. He said 10 years ago, maybe I would have said the opposite. But so it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. Of course, we want to see it ourselves. But, I think that, kind of meshing what he's done with what Michigan is probably the way to go. And he's right. I mean, things have worked with the way Michigan's done it outside of last season.
Yeah, I'll tell you, two things that impressed me about him. Number one, his humility, right? He's not one of these guys that comes in here and like, I know what I'm doing. I've been around forever and this and that. And you don't question me, so on and so forth. I think he is genuinely excited to be at a place like Michigan. And that's the kind of guy that you want here. Now, that works both ways, right? I think there are a lot of guys who, if they aren't qualified, obviously are going to be happy to be here too and say, okay, but he's more than qualified. This is a guy, in my opinion, after digging into his resume a little bit more, you look at it and say, okay, this is a really, really good hire. You didn't win the press conference, maybe. Everybody's like, what, Chip Lindsey? And he's not one of the top 5-6 names on the list, or, doesn't have this unbelievable resume of.
Did they win the podcast, though?
Right. I thought he did. I thought he was great. So, and John Jansen always asks great questions, man. Jansen's as good as it gets. He's a good friend and just a professional. So, but he wasn't going to come here and say, yeah, we're going to completely scrap things and go speed and space and all that garbage. That Josh Gaddis was talking about, for example. He understands that the way Sharon Moore wants to win, and he has a plan to execute that while improving the passing game and improving explosive plays. Because remember, we heard a lot of this last spring too about explosive plays and everything else. And God, did they have one pass over 30 yards or something like that last year? It was ridiculous. So, but he's clearly got a vision. He is clearly a great football mind, a great offensive mind. Now it's just a matter of, does he have the horses to do it? I think he's going to have the quarterback eventually. They got to get some more receivers, and it really, again, still starts up front. Michigan's really got to develop a good offensive line to make it work.
Totally agree. And that's one of the question marks on this team. Not only who's your 5, but who's your next 5. And, I mean, a couple of years ago, they were about 8, 9, 10 deep, probably closer to 10 than 8. And last year was maybe 7, but it wasn't even that good at the top. And this year, I see even less numbers in terms of proven commodities. We'll see if guys can emerge. But, I mean, that's going to be big. I think you have some good running backs. I like the tight end room. I think it's solid. And then, like you said, the quarterbacks kind of wait and see in terms of like how ready is Bryce Underwood. We'll talk about him in a second. What is Mikey Keene transferring up to this level? Of course, he has familiarity with Chip Lindsey, having worked under him at UCF in 2022. And Davis Warren obviously injured and probably missed the start of the season. So you have that. You have the offensive line. It's two of the most important position groups on the field. But I do think probably his run game roots are a little underrated. He talked a lot about his time with Todd Monken at Southern Miss, I believe, and Todd Monken, now the offensive coordinator with the Baltimore Ravens, kind of took over for Greg Roman a couple of years ago. and has kind of put his own touches on what is an incredible Baltimore Ravens run game. Of course, doesn't hurt to have Lamar and Derrick Henry there, but
Mm-hmm.
kind of operating that. And then also his time with Gus Malzahn, who's a very creative offensive mind and has had really good run games in the past. He mentioned, we had 1 year, we had a 1,500-yard rusher and a 3,000-yard passer. So those are things that you certainly want Michigan to be able to replicate under Chip Lindsey. Quarterbacks-wise was, kind of interesting. I think we all know like how good of a talent Bryce Underwood is, how athletic he is. I mean, just see him walking around, you can just tell how good of an athlete he is. But I think two of the words that stood out to me were humble and driven is how Chip Lindsey described Bryce Underwood. He said he's going to coach all the quarterbacks the same, that they're all going to have to be responsible to learn the protections, things like that. But they're going to put them in good situations. He said, they want to be able to get the ball to their playmakers, which that's kind of one of those question marks, right? Where I'm like, all right, well, what are these playmakers? But said they'll all get an equal amount of reps early on in spring practice.
Yeah, and the one thing about everything we've heard about Bryce Underwood is that his teammates love him,
Mm-hmm.
and he's not coming in here like some prima donna, like I'm the number one player in the country and I got my money and so on and so forth. He's exactly the opposite, which makes him a great fit at Michigan and the kind of teammate that they're exactly looking for. It reminds you of J.J. McCarthy, right? In a lot of ways, who was probably the humblest superstar that I've ever seen at Michigan, and that's saying something, right? Because there have been quite a few. A lot of guys played with an edge. J.J. McCarthy only cared about two things: winning and his teammates. Right? Of course, he wanted to get of course, he would have loved to have more the stats and stuff. We remember after that game where they ran 32 times in a row against Penn State, and he asked Sharon Moore, "Don't you trust me?" And Sharon told him, "I absolutely trust you. I didn't trust your protection that day." Right? So you're going to always have that in a quarterback. But this is a guy. Just look at his picture here. If you're just listening and you can't see the pictures of this kid, what a specimen, right? He's got every tool, and I think at least probably by halfway through the year, he's the starting quarterback, maybe from game one, depending on how Mikey Keene plays. You might want to go with that experience on the road. Mikey Keene's a winner too, and I think that's what a lot of people are failing to recognize here is that, well, he's only 5'11" or 6 feet tall, and he doesn't have the huge arm, and he's not Bryce Underwood, but he's got that experience, and he's won a lot of games and been in a lot of different situations. So if you go to Oklahoma, right, that is a great piece to have, even if Bryce Underwood is going to play, which he is. I think Bryce Underwood plays from the get-go. As somebody in the building told me, follow the money when I asked who would the starting quarterback be from game one. So, but to me, he's going to have a lot of success running the ball too. Here's a guy that is big enough and physical enough to take some hits, and you have to use that as a weapon. I didn't think they used J.J. McCarthy enough in that respect, but they did what they had to do to win a national championship, so I'm not complaining that much. I think Bryce Underwood is a special talent who you are going to see have great success with his arms and his legs, and that Chip Lindsey is a guy who knows how to use that.
I think one of the things with J.J. McCarthy is it felt like every time he took a hit, he'd get up and kind of be limping or, a little off balance. And I think that scared them given what the backup quarterback situation was. I think if Bryce Underwood comes in, speaking to your point on Mikey Keene, whether he's the starter or whether he kind of has a role off the bench, which I think he will, even if he doesn't win the starting job, you can run him. And I think you feel a little bit more confident about who the next guy is in there, which would be Mikey Keene.
Right.
The concern to me about Mikey Keene is the one knock on him is how he deals with pressure, and Michigan's offensive line doesn't look like it's going to be as good. Bryce Underwood, more mobile, might give him a leg up in terms of, kind of similar to when Michigan played, not that it's going to be like this every game. Michigan played Georgia in the Orange Bowl. And one of the reasons why J.J. McCarthy started taking all the snaps is because they couldn't protect, and they needed somebody who could at least make a guy miss. I think Underwood could bring that to the table.
Yeah, and I'm disappointed so far with the offensive line additions, and I understand it's not going to be fixed overnight, but it can be, right, in the portal. So you had some big time whiffs at positions that I thought really, with players that really could have helped this team. Now, the other side of that is you have some experience coming back, and if guys like Gio Hottie plays to his potential, Greg Crippen's a 5th-year guy, so maybe he ups his game another notch. But I really thought that they needed 2 or 3, and I don't think the guys that they brought in are going to be difference makers. I think that they are depth pieces at this point. Maybe I'll be proven wrong, and I hope I am, but extremely concerned about the left tackle position, right? I like Evan Link on the inside. I think Andrew Sprague will be fine. Plus on the right side at right tackle. And but from there, there are a lot of question marks. And did they get the most out of these guys last year? We keep saying that. People get mad at us for criticizing, when we think somebody didn't do a great job coaching or whatever. And but I don't think there's anybody that would argue that that offensive line didn't reach its potential last year, and for various reasons. And the buck stops with the coaches. And Sharon Moore is a great offensive line coach. We know that. Is he going to have to be more hands-on? Is that why they brought Juan Castillo in? And again, this is nothing personal against Grant Newsome, and maybe he'll prove us wrong, and he can shove it in our face the way that Wink Martindale shoved it in Angelique's face on the field after the Alabama game. You still think I blitzed too much, right? Or something like that,
When she had never written that once.
Exactly, she had not. It wasn't her that it was really aimed at. He was speaking generally, probably to some of her colleagues at a different paper, if we're being honest. So, but that's I would love nothing more than for Grant Newsome to say, okay, come up to me and say, hey, screw you. Look at us. We dominated. We were in the Joe Moore running again, and even though I think weren't they like a quarter finalist or a top 12 for the Joe Moore last year, if I'm not mistaken, or was it?
I don't think so.
Okay, I hope not. I didn't think so either, but yeah, I'm gonna have to go back and look at that. But regardless, that's where it starts to me, and that's why I'm going to continue to beat that drum, because good offense starts up front, and I still think Michigan's lacking in a few positions there.
Could it have been losing your top 6 offensive linemen, and there's a reason why you brought in some of those transfers to start over the guys who were backups that became starters?
Yeah, but Josh Preeb underachieved, right? And speaking to people really close to it, they're like, man, that was, and again, I don't want to calling people out, but man, we had higher expectations of him. Gio Hottie, we've seen him play better football than he played last year. There were times that he completely looked lost. So Greg Crippen kind of was what he was, has been his entire career, but you're waiting for some of these guys to take that next step. Fundamentally sound and technique is what you're looking for. We're not looking for example, Andrew Vistardis, right? Got the most out of his talent. In my opinion, he wasn't going to be Olu Oluwatimi, but this is a guy where you knew that you could count on him and that he was going to be in the right place and do the right thing and take the right steps. Sometimes he got physically overwhelmed in that Georgia game. It comes to mind. I remember when he was pulling it and it looked like he hit a brick wall one time. But that's what I'm looking for in terms of improvement. And then the wide receivers too. We haven't even talked about the wide receivers, right? I do know for a fact, and we'll talk about this in tomorrow's Inside the Fort, that they are still looking at that position and on the offensive line as well. And you can, as we've seen late in the spring portal, get some guys who can make a difference. So to me, that's going to be the key between a really good year, if the defense is what we expect it to be, Clay, and a good year.
Definitely. And as Chip Lindsey said, and having a good defense is offensive coordinator's dream. And I think Wink Martindale would say the same thing, and probably in an honest moment be like, all right, let's get a little more out of this offense. But man, the fact that they found a way to win the end of last year with essentially no offense is pretty incredible. And I think that's why Wink Martindale is comfortable being like, hey, screw everybody. We did it regardless of who we had on the field, guys that opted out, this and that. It was really remarkable to watch at the end of the season. But they need more out of the offense. If you're going to do it for 15, 16, 17 games, if you're going to be able to play that amount of contests next year, you're going to need more out of the offense. So, and Chip Lindsey talked a lot about how spring ball is more like rolling the balls out there, seeing who's who. He didn't want to watch too much film on last year of what guy is this and what guy does that well. He kind of wants a clean slate. I think probably some of those offensive guys will welcome that, especially with better quarterback play. Mm-hmm. And maybe, that's what it takes for some of these guys to step up. And then you have the guys that were underclassmen that are motivated, like Fred Moore. When I talked to him after the bowl game saying, I'm going to do everything I can this offseason to put myself in position. I'm going to work as hard as possible, stick around. And he wants to get 1,000 yards and win a national championship. I don't blame him for aiming high, in kind of reaching for some of those high, lofty goals. So some guys could emerge that didn't have big seasons last year, but it'll be interesting. And we are under a month away until spring practices begin. They announced last week spring game April 19th on Big Ten Network noon. And as someone said, that's a later end of the spring game, but it'll still be 25 degrees and like a mist in the air. And
I hope not.
That's how it goes. I hope not too.
Holy Saturday, right? I believe
it is Holy Saturday.
Yep.